Reading aloud. Warhammer 40,000 Codex, Eye of Terror. By Games Workshop. Written by Andy Chambers, Pete Haynes, Andy Hoare, Phil Kelly, and Graham McNeil. First published in 2003 for the third edition of the game. Read by Matthew Eric Brown.
Tool. Lord Inquisitor Goradon, Ordo Sinos, Nemesis Tessera.
From.
Interrogator Karas, Clearance Omicron.
Subject.
Ahriman of the Thousand Suns.
Priority.
Ultra High, immediate action requested.
Received.
999.M41.
Message format.
Telepathic.
Astropathic duct.
Chima Lomas.
Thought for the day.
Wisdom is the beginning of fear. Honored Inquisitor, allow me to introduce myself to you. My name is Verdun Kiris, a loyal servant of the God Emperor and former pupil of Inquisitor Sevek. It has been both my pleasure and honor to serve the Honorable Inquisitor for nearly 5 decades in an investigative capacity, seeking out information, as well as undertaking other, more esoteric missions involving Xeno creatures. As sign of my truth, I urge you to seek counsel from the biologist at Nemesis Tessera and verify the gene sequence data attached to this message. But now, to the substance of this missive. It is with heavy heart I bring your attention to the disappearance of my master. I fear a terrible fate has befallen him, and it was his instruction that in such circumstances I should contact you and seek guidance. It has long been dread to my master that the being known as Ahriman of the Thousand Suns discover his whereabouts and force him to reveal hidden knowledge imparted to him by the Eldar. To fully understand the dire implications of this, I must unfortunately reveal to you much knowledge that should best remain secret. As I am sure you are aware, Ahriman was once a librarian in the Thousand Suns Legion of Space Marines, and under the tutelage of his Primarch, Magnus the Red, learned much of the ways of sorcery. In time, his mastery of blasphemous magics was almost the equal of his Cyclopean Primarch, and his knowledge of forbidden lore corrupted him beyond redemption. The Thousand Suns were also tainted, and Ahriman realized that the Legion would soon be reduced to little more than gibbering monstrosities. He conceived a great spell to save the Legion, called the Rubric of Ahriman. Its energies were more powerful than he could have possibly anticipated, and its effects on the Thousand Suns devastating. Only those with sorcerous powers were spared its effects, while the remaining of the Legion were reduced to dust within their sealed suits of armor, becoming little more than fighting automations. Enraged with Ahriman's betrayal, Magnus cast him out, and since that day, Ahriman has sought ever more powerful artifacts to increase his understanding of the warp. One source of lore that has always eluded him is the Black Library, a vast repository of ancient secrets collated by the Eldar and gathered together in a hidden place unknown to the eyes of man. Only those pure of heart and with the strength of mind to comprehend the scale of such awful knowledge may enter this place and sup from its wisdom, and my master was one such individual. Ahriman has long sought Inquisitor Sevek in order to wrest the location of the Black Library from his mind, but through cunning and machinations, my master has thus far eluded his nemesis. But recent developments lead me to believe that the Dread Sorcerer has finally caught up with him. A savant in my employ, having accessed secret files of the Ordo Malleus regarding Ahriman, was recently found dead, and psychometric readings reveal an individual who could be none other than Ahriman himself as the killer. A number of other incidents, at first glance unconnected, but upon further scrutiny, linked in the subtlest of ways, all point to the same dire conclusion. My master's last contact was in the region of space known as the Sentinel Worlds, and it is here that I shall begin my search. I shall investigate further, but it seems clear to me that Ahriman of the Thousand Suns has ensnared Inquisitor Sevek. If this proves to be the case, then I urge you to use whatever power you can bring to bear on this matter and dispatch all force that can be gathered to hunt down this heretic sorcerer and stop him before he achieves whatever nefarious plan he intends to implement. Yours in desperate need, Interrogator Karras.
Sweet, merciful Emperor! The secrets of the Black Library unlocked by the sorcerer of the Red Cyclops? Better that Sevek has perished to some foul xeno creature than fall into his clutches. I shall mobilize the 34th Gudronite Rifles and petition the Chapter Master of the Iron Hands for his warrior's aid. I pray I am not too late.
The Imperium faces its greatest challenge in 10 millennia. The arch-heretic, Abaddon the Despoiler, has forged a fearsome alliance of Chaos Space Marine legions, deviants, traitors, foul mutants, and demons to hurl against the Imperium. The fate of humanity rests on the desperate battles being fought around the Eye of Terror and the garrison world of Cadia, home of the famed Cadian regiments of the Imperial Guard. The Emperor's loyal servants have resisted Abaddon's Black Crusades in the past, but always at a terrible cost. Can they prevent this 13th Crusade, the greatest so far, from breaching the Cadian Gate to assail the very heart of the Imperium? Ancient Terra.
Since the time of the fall, our race has been haunted by what we, in our reckless pursuit of hedonistic indulgence, gave birth to. Though our dreams, once overturned worlds and quenched suns, we are now but fitful shadows clinging to the edge of existence. All the stars in the sky cannot blot out the hateful glare of the red moon's eye. The birthing place of the great enemy pulses with all the malice of a demon that is dreaming, casting its shadow over all we have ever done, and all we ever shall. Every twisted strand of fate and casting of the runes leads me to this time, to this place, and it is clear that the final battle awaits me at the ancient Crone Worlds, a conflict the likes of which has not been seen since the Monkai warred amongst themselves, and their corpse of a seer fell to his traitorous son. Is coming, and all my steps lead towards it, no matter that I walk other paths. I see the stars stained red with the blood of the Monkai, and though their wars do not concern me, and I would gladly let them destroy one another. I know that to avoid this fight is to condemn my race to inevitable doom. And though all I see is darkness, I know that I will not flinch from my destiny.
Eldrad Ulthran, Farseer, of Ulthway Craft World. History of the Cadian Gate, Gateway to the Eye of Terror. To fully understand the Cadian people and their way of life, it is necessary to go back 10,000 years to a time lost in legend, a time of war and blood, known as the Horus Heresy. The Emperor and his progeny, the Primarchs, stood shoulder to shoulder and carved a realm amongst the stars in a time of heroes. Each Primarch led a legion of the Emperor's finest soldiers, genetically enhanced warriors known as the Space Marines, and fought battles beyond number to liberate human space from the clutches of aliens, chaos, and all manner of terrible foes. Each of the Primarchs was a superhuman figure, gods amongst men. But like men, they could also be prey to jealousy, bitterness, and vanity. Such was the fate of the War Master Horus, the Emperor's most favored son, and Primarch of the Luna Wolves. Chaos had corrupted Horus so subtly and gradually that he had not recognized his descent into evil until it had already consumed him. Such was Horus's skill in manipulating others to do his bidding that he corrupted fully half of the legions to his cause and led them in a rebellion against the Emperor. As hostilities erupted, it became clear that the rot had spread much further than anyone could have believed possible, as regiment after regiment of the Imperial Guard declared for Horus. The collegias of the Adeptus Mechanicus split apart in rebellion, and entire Titan legions unfurled banners with the blasphemous runes of the Chaos Gods upon them. Horus attacked without mercy, driving the forces of his once-brother Space Marines before him. Before long, Horus's advance had breached the heart of the Emperor's realm. His warships had defeated Battlefleet Solar and smashed the lunar defenses, leaving Terra virtually unprotected. The hordes of chaos landed on the holy soil of Terra. Traitor Space Marines, shambling mutants, and cultists beyond number. The battle raged for many weeks, with the death toll spiraling into the millions. Everywhere, the forces of the Emperor were pushed back, choking the halls of the Imperial Palace with dead as they fought for every yard of ground. Eventually, the traitors breached the final walls of the palace, and the end looked certain. Horus was a master strategist, but it was at this point that he made a fatal error. Knowing that Imperial reinforcements in the shape of the Dark Angels and Space Wolves were nearing, he knew he had to end the siege of the Emperor's palace soon. Horus moved his battle barge into low orbit and ordered its shields lowered. Whether this was a reckless gamble or the last of Horus's humanity surfacing will never be known. But, faced with such an opportunity, the Emperor could not afford to miss this chance to take the fight to Horus. The Emperor and two of his most devoted Primarchs, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels and Rogel Dorn of the Imperial Fists, teleported onto Horus's flagship with their most trusted warriors. They found a craft warped by the powers of chaos, barely recognizable as having been forged by human hands. Diabolical sorceries scattered the Emperor's forces throughout the ship, and when the Emperor finally came face to face with Horus, he found the War Master standing above the broken body of Sanguinius.
The Emperor fought Horus in every way imaginable, physically, spiritually, and psychically, with the war-torn planet below as the prize for the victor. The battle was long, but eventually, the Emperor was able to defeat Horus, though it was at the cost of much of his humanity. At the battle's conclusion, the Emperor's body was little more than a broken shell. Rogel Dorn found the Emperor's shattered body and returned him to Earth, whereupon he ascended to the golden throne that sustains his life force to this very day. The defeated traitor forces collapsed with the death of Horus and fled in disarray from the gates of Terra that had proved to be just beyond their grasp. Some loyalist forces rallied and gave chase, but most remained on Terra to consolidate their great victory. Many rebels were put to the sword, but the majority of the traitor legions escaped to the realm of space known as the Eye of Terror, that region of space where reality and insanity collide, and the raw energy of the warp pours into real space in a swirling maelstrom. Here, the gods of chaos rule over uncounted planets, all warped to their own evil aspects. And this is where the traitor legions found refuge from their pursuers, isolated from the galaxy by powerful warp storms. Each world within the Eye of Terror is a demon world, warped and twisted by the whims of the gods of chaos and the powerful demon princes who rule them. The traitor legions regrouped and nurtured their hatred, planning for the day when they would wreak a terrible vengeance on those who had defied them. Within the Eye, time flows differently. Those same traitors who fought on Terra still fight in the service of their monstrous gods. They fight against each other to prove their supremacy, and against the forces of the Imperium when the warp storms calm long enough to allow them to rampage into Imperial space. The sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror are heavily militarized to resist these invasions when they come, and none more so than Cadia, the fortress world that stands at the mouth of the one stable route leading from the Eye of Terror, the Cadian Gate. Fortress Cadia. Cadia stands upon the one reliable route to and from the Eye of Terror, and as such is one of the most strategically vital worlds in the Imperium. There are other routes from the Eye, but none are as stable as the Cadian Gate, and no force of any size can venture forth from the Eye without first passing through it. The exact reasons for this calm area of space is uncertain, though many believe it is due to the presence of the famous Cadian Pylons. These mysterious black monoliths dot the landscape of Cadia, and their origins have remained unexplained since Cadia was first settled by humans. Cadia itself is a bleak, merciless, and wind-blown planet where only the strongest survive to adulthood and discipline is learned at the earliest age. Cold winds howl across wide, sundered plains, where armies train with live ammunition, and every day not spent training is a day wasted. Every city, or casser, is a fortress, with the streets and buildings fashioned with great cunning by the finest military architects. Every Cadian is taught the skills of the warrior as soon as they can walk, and they are much sought after by commanders throughout the galaxy. Such a planet breeds hardy and determined warriors, and the Cadian regiments have a well-deserved reputation for both honor and fighting spirit. From the earliest age, Cadians are taught to field strip a weapon with their eyes shut, and tactical doctrine is taught before reading and writing. One soldier in every 10 is recruited into the Interior Guard, regardless of ability or achievements, and as a result, some of the most able soldiers spend their entire military service on Cadia, and the soldiers of the Cadian Planetary Defense Force
are amongst the most effective and skilled fighting men in the Imperium. The pylon had been looming in our widescreen for a while now, and fishing swept us around it, almost kissing the black stone. The moaning song of the wind as it laced through the geometries of the pylon was now so loud, I could hear it over the racing turbines of the speeder. The pylon was vast, half a kilometer high and a quarter square. The upper facing of the smooth black stone was machined with delicate craft to form holes and other round-edged orifices no bigger than a man's head. It was through these slim 250-meter tubes that the wind moaned and howled. And the tubes weren't straight. They wove through the pylon like worm tongues. Tech Magi had tried running tiny servitor probes through them to map their loops. But generally, the probes didn't come back. As we banked up higher for another pass, I could see the distant shape of the neighboring pylon across the moors 60 kilometers away. 5,810 known pylons dot the surface of Cadia, not counting the 2,000 others that remained as partial ruins or buried relics. No two are identical in design. Each one rises to a precise half-kilometer height and is sunk a quarter-kilometer into the ground. They predate mankind's arrival in this system, and their manner of manufacture is unknown. They are totally inert by any Auspex measure known to our race, but many believe their presence explains the quieting of the violent warp torrents that makes the Cadian Gate the single calm navigable route to the Oculus Terribus. Excerpted from the novel Malleus by Dan Abnett, used courtesy of the Black Library. The training I undertook upon my assignment to the 122nd Cadian Regiment was different from the normal activities involved in most regimental training I had thus far undergone in my career with the Imperial Commissariat. My initial surprise was the youth of my companions in the basic training program, all of whom were much, much younger than myself, the oldest being perhaps 14. I had heard that the Cadians began their training young, but frankly, this astonished me, though not as much as the level of competence displayed by such youngsters. At first, I was indignant at being forced to train with children, but I was soon to be disabused of this notion after witnessing their fitness and skill at arms. There were many specialized skills I needed to learn very quickly in order to operate with the Cadians, and the emphasis was very definitely on improving my stamina and overall strength. For too long I had ridden in the cupola of a chimera, and the first days of training were harder than any battle I have fought in. But I was determined to uphold the honor of my position and refuse to fail. In short, after 3 months, I could run, jump, and fight for prodigious distances, carrying a significant weight. Such activities required special determination, and failure is not an option for troopers in the Cadian regiments. As a newly assigned Commissar, I had to perform doubly well to earn the respect of the soldiers. One of the biggest factors in the Cadian training program is learning to function as a team. Every challenge and exercise is undertaken in groups of at least squad size, and frequently larger. And it is crucial that the soldiers learn to operate effectively together. We learned how to move at pace as an entire group, known as speed marching in the Kasserkin, and something of an art form. We also learned the difference between operating as an individual and as part of a squad, something I had not previously considered valuable. Many times during my first 3 months, I almost faltered and was forced to rely on my squad to get through a number of challenges. It soon became clear to me that it is a ritual amongst the Cadian troopers to try to outperform anyone they perceive as an outsider. And this insular nature was one of the many hurdles I had overcome in my time with the 122nd. But say what you will about the Cadians, they are amongst the strongest and most thoroughly disciplined formations I have ever had the honor of serving with. Excerpted from the Memoirs of Commissar Kotarian Varick, assigned to the 122nd Cadian Regiment, 963.M41. Like many sector-wide conflicts, the Gothic War began slowly, with sporadic and seemingly insignificant raids against smaller outposts. Quad Vitae, the Arcs raid. Vessels stricken with disease were discovered adrift in the Athena sector, along with sightings of the Chaos vessel, Plague Claw, and astropaths began reporting unsettling disturbances in the warp. Panic and anarchy became widespread as fanatical sects arose, believing that the Emperor, bless his holy name, was displeased with them. Hysteria spread throughout the sector, and on many worlds order broke down completely. The Imperial Navy lost several ships to accidents in space docks that were subsequently blamed on poor maintenance and faulty ammunition. A rather too convenient explanation for my taste. 3 years after the first raid on Arcs, the forces of the Despoiler struck. Abaddon's fleet struck at a dozen Imperial bases and sent the warships of Battlefleet Gothic reeling. Chaos ships attacked all across the Gothic sector, and the first inkling of Abaddon's true intentions was to come to light in the Rebo system, where one of the mysterious Blackstone fortresses orbited the 5th planet. These massive edifices of unknown origin had been refitted to serve as bases for the ships of Battlefleet Gothic. For the first time in history, one of these fell to Abaddon's forces, and he was soon to make horrifying use of the captured base. Abaddon's fleet had a devastating weapon, never before seen, named the Planet Killer. Its name was not simply born from the arrogance of its builders, but horrifyingly well-deserved, as Abaddon demonstrated at the Cardinal World of Savavin. The account of the destruction of Savavin, from Jeremiah Soldagon, Savavin's orbital defense commander, still has the power to chill the soul. His description of continents splitting apart, burning skies, and the planet breaking into pieces makes solemn reading indeed. 14 million people died within an hour, and the crippling effects of this on Imperial morale should not be underestimated. Many worlds were hurriedly, though unfortunately not entirely, evacuated before the Planet Killer arrived. Another Blackstone fell at Brenaga. At Phalaris II, Abaddon was to terrifyingly demonstrate the true power of these ancient constructs. Exact information regarding the incident is sketchy, but evidence points to a massive energy beam being unleashed from the Blackstone fortress that scoured Phalaris II bare, stripping its atmosphere and transforming its surface into a barren, rocky plain. Imperial forces were continually engaged throughout the sector, from the Hammerhead Deeps to the Cyclops Cluster, desperate to halt the might of the Chaos Fleet. At the outset of 151.M41, Lord Admiral Ravensburg took the fight to the enemy, resulting in the clash at Gethsemane, where he was able to utterly destroy a Chaos Fleet of considerable size. Eldar vessels also fought in this battle, though many historians believe their role to have been minimal, whereas my researches, particularly into the actions of Captain Lotan Semper and his ship, the Lord Solar Macarius, point to a considerable Eldar involvement in the latter stages of the war. QVID, Warp Gates. News of this great victory invigorated the Imperial Navy, and as the warp storms that had isolated the Gothic sector for so long began to abate, vessels from neighboring sectors were finally able to reinforce the Lord Admiral's bloodied fleet. Abaddon brought the full power of the Blackstones to bear on the Star of Tarantus, the mustering point for the ships entering the Gothic sector, in an attempt to stem Ravensburg's reinforcements. Combining their power, the Blackstones caused the Tyrannus star to explode, killing everything still within the system. The final battle of the war was to be fought at Shindelgeist, where Blackstone 5 floated in the depths of space. A trap was sprung by the Lord Admiral and the Eldar, who defeated Abaddon's greatest fleet in a truly magnificent 3-day battle. In an act of spite, Abaddon sought to destroy the star there also, and had it not been for the sacrifice of Captain Abridal on the Flame of Purity, the victory would have been a hollow one. Abaddon had been defeated, though he escaped with 2 of his captured Blackstones, though various sources claim that they must have been destroyed. Unfortunately, this appears to be merely wishful thinking. While the ultimate fate of those immeasurably powerful artifacts is yet unknown, I fear the Imperium will eventually rue their loss. Creeping death. As the end of the 41st millennium drew closer, the first signs that Abaddon's long-feared attack was imminent came in the form of numerous sightings of drifting vessels emerging from the warp in the surrounding sectors. All were converging on the core systems of each subsector, and while this number of space hulks was rare, it was not unheard of. System defense ships scrambled to intercept them and prevent them from reaching their system's inhabited worlds. The vessels of the Adeptus Astartes boarded those they could, but their numbers were limited. The Space Marines found them to be twisted and disease-ridden nightmares, encrusted with all manner of necrotic matter and toxic filth. Subsequently, every such vessel encountered was destroyed with torpedoes and bombardment cannons, but for some, it was already too late. With a synchronicity that could not have been coincidence, outbreaks of virulent sickness erupted among Imperial Navy crews within a day of a reported sighting of the dreaded Chaos vessel, Plague Claw, in the outer reaches of the Ulthwart system by Captain Roark of the Dauntless-class cruiser Duke Lurstofen. As the sickness spread throughout the region's naval forces, and the number of ships fit for duty fell exponentially, even more hulks dropped from the warp, converging on vital strategic worlds. Ships from neighboring subsectors rushed to destroy the hulks, and a small ad hoc fleet was assembled at Bellis Corona under the command of Admiral Quarren. The fleet surged from port and began to hunt for the Plague Claw, though they were to encounter something far, far worse. In the shadow of the Frenerex dust cloud, the fleet was ambushed by a force of Chaos warships led by the Terminus Est, flagship of the Herald of Nurgle, Typhus himself. The battle was short and bloody, with several Imperial ships crippled in the opening salvo of torpedoes, while others were overrun by vile, diseased creatures that vomited forth from loathsome boarding craft. Admiral Quarren recovered well and rallied his forces superbly, counterattacking and fighting his way clear of the trap. Typhus did not pursue, and the majority of Quarren's fleet was able to limp back to port. The Battle of Frenerex had been a costly disaster, but there was worse to come. During the return journey to Bellis Corona, thousands of crewmen sickened and died, and only with the help of system pilots was the fleet able to dock safely. But if the situation at Bellis Corona was bad, it was worse elsewhere. Many of the plague hulks had slipped through the defensive net, and the same contagion that had struck down the ship's crews was spreading like wildfire through many inhabited worlds in the Cadian and Agrippina sectors, as well as those of the Bellis Corona subsector. The hive world of Subiaco Diablo proved to be an ideal breeding ground for the unknown plague, and was quickly quarantined by officers from the Officio Medicae, but not before millions had already perished. Within a month, a dozen other worlds reported cases of the plague, and panic spread as transit between neighboring sectors was halted in an effort to stem further infection. As the epidemic spread, apocalyptic sects began appearing on every world affected, preaching that the Emperor's wrath had descended upon them, and was a punishment for their sins of wickedness and vice. Only the faithful would be spared the curse of unbelief, and hordes of flagellating devotees filled the streets of every world around the Eye of Terror. The continued health of these fanatics gave their worlds a sheen of truth, and millions flocked to hear their fiery rhetoric. The plague continued to spread, but it was on Subiaco Diablo that the true horror of the plague was finally revealed. To the shock and disgust of the planet's inhabitants, the mass graves deep in the ash plains heaved and split, the corpses of those who had perished in the plague climbing from the lime-encrusted ground. Soon, millions of shambling corpses were advancing on the hive, clawing their way inside and attacking the weakened inhabitants. Within months, plague zombies were climbing from their graves on scores of worlds throughout the Bellis Corona and Agrippina sectors, and Imperial forces were stretched to the limit in containing these abominations, as well as mobs of flagellating zealots who burned Medicae ward facilities to the ground in their misguided attempts to halt the plague. Paralyzed by the sheer scale of the epidemic, the naval forces in these regions were completely unprepared for the vast Chaos Fleet that emerged at the edge of the Subiaco Diablo system and surged into Imperial space. The Herald of Nurgle, the Traveler, Typhus of the Death Guard, had come to reap the harvest of his plague, and nothing stood ready to stop him. The Black Crusades of Abaddon the Despoiler. Abaddon the Despoiler, the arch-heretic, whose name is a curse on 1,000 worlds, once led the first company of the Luna Wolves, and was as devoted and brave a warrior as any. The Emperor later honored Horus's legion by decreeing that its name be changed to the Sons of Horus. But when heresy erupted, it was clear that Abaddon's loyalties lay with the War Master. Abaddon fought at the forefront of the war, zealously tearing asunder that which he had once helped conquer in the name of the Emperor. Abaddon was Horus's most favored warrior, and it was rumored that he was in fact the War Master's cloned son. When the final battle of the heresy came, Abaddon was fighting on another part of the War Master's battle barge, though he felt the psychic shockwave of Horus's death resonate through the warp, and his scream of anguish plunged him deeper into madness than any mortal should ever fall. He fought his way to the bridge and found the corpse of his beloved War Master, taking the lightning claw from Horus's wrist for his own. Though every instinct screamed at Abaddon to wreak his vengeance, he knew that the forces left to him were not enough to win the day. Horus's last gamble had failed, and the war was over. Taking command of the battle barge, Abaddon led the retreat to the Eye of Terror, assuming command of the Sons of Horus and renaming them the Black Legion. Abaddon vanished into the Eye of Terror and entered the realms of dark legend. Decades passed before Abaddon was to return, surging from the Eye at the head of a massive army and smashing aside the defenders to pour forth into Imperial space. For a time, it looked as though Abaddon would succeed in breaking through the defenses around the Eye of Terror, and only the combined might of several Space Marine chapters and the Titan legions finally halted this first of Abaddon's Black Crusades. Since that day, there have been 11 separate Black Crusades, ranging from small raids to sector-spanning conflicts that have cost the lives of millions of Imperial soldiers. On the world of Elfinor, the Despoiler exterminated the kin of the Chromarch, and on Macan, Abaddon earned the eternal hatred of the Blood Angels when he slew their warriors and violated their flesh. Beneath the Tower of Silence on Erlen, Abaddon was led to the demon sword Drachnyan by a golden-skinned stranger, and with this cursed item, carved himself a realm of diabolical evil within the Eye of Terror before plunging the Gothic sector into war. Once more the Imperium was victorious, but the cost of victory was high, and 2 of the Blackstone fortresses, powerful weapons created in ancient times by long-forgotten hands, were lost to the Despoiler. Numerous other incursions, too scattered and random to be called Black Crusades, have plagued the Cadian sector, and there can be no respite while this most evil of heretics still lives. Now, dire portents wax nigh, and even the most blinkered cannot fail to see a pattern emerging in the attacks in the sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror. The Emperor's Tarot regularly displays powerful cards representing war and death on an apocalyptic scale, and astropaths report horrifying visions of torrents of blood raining from the sky to drown the Imperium of man. Even the Eldar, aloof and cruel aliens, have given warning of the rise of a great uniter, as deep within the anarchy of the Eye of Terror, ancient feuds have been set aside in the face of Abaddon's leadership. Bitter hatreds, such as that between the World Eaters and the Emperor's children, following the Battle of Scalathrax, have been quelled, and even the Alpha Legion and the Wordbearers share an uneasy peace. Binding oaths and debts have been called to account, and a force, the likes of which has not been seen since the Horus Heresy, has been assembled, ready to strike the Imperium like a thunderbolt. The War in the Web. His heart was beating a rapid tattoo within his chest, and Nyadin had to concentrate to contain his excitement. It was difficult to do so this close to the Avatar's throne room, and doubly so on the eve of battle. But it would not do to show such an unseemly display of emotion before his Farseer. Eldrad Ulthran had called him here to the Dome of Crystal Seers by name, and, though he was intensely curious as to why, given that he was a warrior, not a seer, he was impatient to return to his training. Nyadin carried his helmet in the crook of his arm, the flexible wraithbone armor feeling natural against his body, and the spirits of its former wearers filling him with the urge to fight. Dimly, he remembered the moment he had forsaken the life of Nyadin the poet, to become Nyadin, the striking Scorpion Exarch. But that was a long time ago, and such thoughts were fleeting and ephemeral in the face of the prospect of battle against the forces of the ancient enemy. The wraithbone of the craft world pulsed with aggression, and a thrumming current of barely suppressed violence saturated every Eldar with the lust for battle. The Avatar was close to waking, and its dreams of violence and bloodshed permeated every facet of Ulthway. The air sang with the promise of battle, and Nyadin felt its call resonate in every fiber of his being.
The bloody-handed one calls to you, does he not, Nyadin?
Said a soft voice behind him. He spun, hand involuntarily reaching for his sword, but relaxing as he saw the venerable Farseer. Eldrad Ulthran made his way awkwardly through the soft glowing crystal trees of the dome, leaning heavily on his ornately carved staff. Nyadin saw that his flesh shone with a faint, crystalline light, the skin translucent and unyielding. Nyadin nodded curtly.
Yes, I can feel his heat burning in my veins. The call to war is one I cannot refuse.
I know, said Eldrad softly.
It is your appointed path, and to deny that is to walk the road that has but one end.
Eldrad stopped beside a long and gracefully curved crystal tree, its structure veined with darting lights and the suggestion of a peaceful face swimming in its depths.
These are dark times for our people, Nyadin,
began Eldrad.
The one called the Despoiler readies his armies, and the Monkai do not heed my warnings. What has this to do with us, Lord Ulthran?
Growled Nyadin.
If the Monkai wish to destroy themselves, let them. Ulthway is all that matters.
The Farseer nodded.
Normally, I would agree with you. But there are other forces at work here, Nyadin. The Silver Warriors of the Inga have returned. The Necrontyr? After so long? Yes. They seek to destroy the remaining talismans of Vol, and without them, we are helpless against the Star Gods. We should have taken them from the Monkai before they could lose them to the Despoiler,
said Nyadin, unable to contain the venom in his tone.
True,
agreed Eldrad.
But the Jackal God's foresight stretches from the dawn of time, and eclipses even mine. He isolated the Gothic sector, and we had not the strength to stop him. But there is worse, Nyadin. Ahriman, the sorcerer of the Red Cyclops, has breached the webway, and he brings his soulless warriors and the power of ancient magics.
Nyadin recoiled in horror at the thought of a minion of chaos within the sacred pathways of the Eldar. Such an affront could not be tolerated, and his warrior spirit burned with fury at this upstart Mong Kai's temerity.
He seeks the Black Library, and the ancient knowledge it contains. He must not discover it, for there are secrets it keeps that should never have been revealed, even to us. He will not discover it when I draw breath, assured Nyadin. My strike force is assembled, and our webway portal is prepared. We await only your order to depart. Send us to war, Lord Ulthran. In time, Nyadin. In time,
soothed Eldrad, staring wistfully at the crystal trees of his ancestors, Farseer stretching back to the time of the fall.
The Darkkin are also aware of the breach in the webway and mass for war. Their efforts to save the Twilight City of Kamara will be in vain, and the bloodshed they unleash will only make things worse. There is one amongst them who thirsts for my death, and he does not care that his actions will lead his people, as well as ours, to their doom. What would you have me do, Lord Ulthran?
Eldrad turned and rested his hand upon the shoulder guard of Nyadin's armor, feeling the lust for violence of all the exarchs who had worn the armor before Nyadin, straining to be unleashed in battle once more.
We must await the avatar of Kayla Menshakain, Nyadin. We will need his strength and the fury of his presence to prevail in the coming war. I have seen many futures leading to this point, and in all of them, the Avatar walks among us.
Nyadin felt his heart swell with pride as he realized what must come next.
This is why I have called you here,
said Eldrad mournfully, drawing a garland of wraithorns from a pouch at his waist.
You have been chosen, Nyadin. You are to be the young king.
The 13th Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler. As the plague known as the Curse of Unbelief swept through many imperial worlds throughout the Bellis Corona and Agrippina sectors, cults preaching that the Imperium had forsaken the teachings of the Emperor grew in numbers. Decrying the sufferer's sickness as just punishment for their wickedness, they claimed that only in the flames and purgation of pain could the cure be found, and they would prove both. On Malin's Reach and Lelithar, imperial rule all but broke down as the plague crippled the authorities' ability to contain the zealots and screaming demagogues who whipped the mobs into a frenzy of destruction and self-mutilation. Naval facilities and symbols of imperial rule were openly attacked, and over the following weeks, mob rule virtually replaced that of the Administratum on many outlying worlds. Such vast outpourings of zeal and bloodshed echoed in the warp, stirring the already volatile Immaterium into new and violent life. The fringes of warp-storm Baphomet expanded to engulf the edges of the Cadian system, and astropaths based at Kasser Partox reported terrible visions depicting vast plains of mutilated bodies and worlds burned with fire. Such incidences grew and spread throughout the sector until it was to manifest in a horrifyingly manner on the world of Belisar in the choir chamber of astropaths, high on the spire of Hive Teriax. During a routine auto-seance, the senior adept of astropaths began convulsing, his flesh blazing with psychic energy. Emergency warp dampers and null shields dropped into place, but it was already too late as uncontrollable energies burst through into the material world and the top 9 levels of the Hive Spire were instantly vaporized in a massive psychic explosion. The signs were unmistakable, and everything pointed towards a calamity of terrifying proportions. Readings of the Emperor's Tarot produced dire portents, and omens of a fearful nature began appearing across the segmentum. Many of these proved to be false, but rumor and hearsay passed into fact, and fear and paranoia whipped entire populations into terrified, panicked hysteria. Members of the Fraterus clergy, confessors, preachers, and cardinals were dispatched from the sign Administra on Ophelia 7 to provide calm, spiritual, and authoritative guidance, but such was the widespread panic that their voices went largely unheard. Amidst the fear that gripped Imperial citizens, almost lost among all the other incidences of terror and bloodshed, unknown raiders attacked the outlying agri-world of Dentor. The crew of a bulk freighter delivering agricultural machinery discovered this atrocity, finding entire communities butchered like livestock, and the landscape burned. Nothing was taken, and no motive could be ascertained. No more could be done, and the report was buried under the more pressing matters that continued to prey upon the segmentum authorities. On Cadia itself, the adepts tasked with the study of the ancient pylons became aware of a new and unsettling development. The pylons, which had until now been utterly inert, began resonating with an almost imperceptible vibration. Research teams were immediately dispatched to investigate, and their findings were disturbing to say the least. Microscopic stress fractures were developing along the previously impenetrable surfaces of the pylons, and all were resonating at an amplitude similar to that produced by a Geller field, the invisible energy field that shields a starship traveling through the warp. The pylons appeared to be fighting to hold back the power of Warpstorm Baphomet, but were, slowly but surely, destroying themselves in the process. Disintegration. Yet more reports of brutal raids filtered back to Segmentum Command, echoing the savagery of the attack on Dentor. Isolated settlements in the Sarlacc and Amistel systems fell to the mysterious raiders, with each attack more vicious and bloodthirsty than the last. Naval patrols attempted to police the space around the eastern reaches of the Agrippina sector, but their resources were stretched thinly as it was. Following yet another raid, this time against an Imperial research facility on Malin's Reach, the 31st Destroyer Squadron, Deathbringers, operating out of Demios Binary, was attacked and destroyed by unknown ambushers. External pick capture, recovered by salvage teams, recorded confused images of what appeared to be twisted and perverted variants of Space Marine vessels attacking the Cobra-class destroyers, and internal logs, though fragmentary, showed boarders in blue and gold armor butchering the crew. As the attack continued, the Navy pulled all its ships back to port, and tactical strategos identified a pattern in the attacks that appeared to be moving inexorably inward from the eastern subsectors and directly towards Cadia. As naval forces in the Agrippina sector retreated to their bases, yet more disaster was to befall the beleaguered Imperial forces. On Lelithar, a powerful figure arose amongst the raving cults and fanatics, proclaiming himself the voice of the Emperor. An orator of fearsome skill, this mysterious individual roused entire populations with his passionate speeches, and screaming fanatics overran those facilities that remained in Imperial hands, such as spaceports and fortified military bases. Scores of ships and entire arsenals of weaponry were seized as the followers of the Voice took to the stars. His emissaries spread throughout the sector, and cults of the Voice emerged on Yayor, Amistel, Albatern, and even amongst the inmates of the prison world of Bar-El. As destructive as the cults of the Voice were, they spurred a battered Imperium into life. Preachers and missionaries of the Missionaris Galaxia spread throughout the affected regions and decrying the evil of the anti-Imperial cult. Imperial faith rose like a phoenix from the flames, and furious battles erupted between the followers of the Voice and pious servants of the Emperor. Far from destroying the faith of these sectors, there was a resurgence of vows of piety. Imperial assassins and kill teams were dispatched to terminate the leader of this cult, though none were ever seen again. Only one garbled communication from a lone Vindicar assassin gives a clue to the identity of the Voice of the Emperor: a hooded figure carrying a sword and a pair of exquisite pistols. Betrayal on Cadia. Despite disintegrating Imperial rule throughout the sectors surrounding the Eye of Terror, Cadia remained a disciplined center of control. To combat the increasing frequency and scale of chaos activities, the military high command ordered that every shock troop regiment muster on Cadia. Hundreds of extra landing fields were constructed at Kasser Tirok, and the infrastructure required to support such a muster gathered from Kasser Holn, Helotas, and Freemas. Millions of soldiers had already been assembled when the Volskani regiment, considered by many to be the most hardened fighters in the sector, landed on Cadia. Vast dropships brought Leviathan command transports onto Cadian soil, and as the High Command prepared to receive the salute of the newly arrived regiment, the Volskani revealed their true colors. Banners bearing the blasphemous chaos icons unfurled from the building-sized transports, and their massive guns opened fire, destroying the command Leviathan of Governor Primus, Marius Porelska. Volskani troops poured onto the landing fields and attacked the awaiting Cadians, falling on them with unbridled savagery and killing with the ferocity and discipline they were famed for. Battle raged around the spaceport for over an hour, but with so many defenders in place, there could only be one outcome. The Volskani were defeated, but at terrible cost. The Governor Primus and most of the ranking officers were dead, and what was left of the Cadian command structure struggled to maintain order. As the last scattered pockets of resistance were hunted down, the Lord Castellan, Ursakar Creed, took over the reeling Cadian forces, quickly restoring a measure of command and control following the atrocity. As Ursakar Creed fought on the bloody fields of Kasser Tirok, the most trusted advisor of the Governor Secundus collapsed deep inside the fortress of Kasser Vazin, his body bloated and rotting in a manner all too familiar to the surgeons of the Cadian sector. The Kasserkin reacted with admirable speed, but it was too late for the troopers of the Kasser Vazin, and within an hour, the entire fortress was declared unclean and sealed forever. The calm before the storm. There could be no doubt now that a major incursion from the Eye of Terror was imminent, and the newly instated Governor Primus, Ursakar Creed, ordered the Cadian forces to dig in, strengthening their defenses, stockpiling munitions, war materiel, and food and water. Hurried pleas for aid from forces beyond the Cadian sector were dispatched with the highest authentication codes, and within days, missives from the Space Wolves and a number of other chapters of Space Marines arrived, pledging warriors and naval assets to join the fight. Regimental musters were begun in scores of nearby sectors as the Administratum reacted to the threat with a haste unheard of in such a monolithic organization. Imperial forces were gathering, but it would be many weeks, if not months, before enough strength could be gathered. In addition, an unconfirmed report of a fortress monastery afloat on a massive bedrock was filed by Captain Urquhorn of the Gothic-class cruiser A Bridal's Glory. But many of the ship's crew were suffering from fatigue from long hours of duty, and his report was dismissed as the hallucinations of an overtired crew. In addition to this, Cobra squadrons patrolling the edges of the Eye of Terror filed numerous sightings of Eldar ships, though the Navy was unable to engage the aliens as their speed soon carried them beyond weapons range. Fleet Command was at first alarmed by these reports, but the Eldar ships seemed more concerned with flight than combat, and there were no reported engagements between the two forces. Hurried investigations of the worlds the Eldar were abandoning revealed them to be unusually verdant, with strange xenoconstructions that astropaths divined to be warp gates that had been recently, and permanently, sealed. Why the Eldar would abandon these worlds and seal off their precious warp gates was just one mystery amongst hundreds that had surfaced in the preceding months, and there were not the resources to investigate fully. As the Cadian forces prepared for the inevitable attack, yet more assaults from the unknown raiders hit the Tabor and Ulthor systems, but this time, vessels of the Imperial Navy were in position to counterattack. 3 squadrons of Cobra destroyers in conjunction with a lunar-class cruiser, Goliath, pursued the attackers into the Faberus Straits and in a fearsome battle, crippled the Styx-class cruiser, Darkblood. The engagement cost the Navy most of the Cobras, and the Goliath was severely damaged, but at last the attackers had been identified. The Darkblood was codified as being attached to the Night Lord's war leader, Tarek Darkblood, one of the most vicious killers in a legion replete with sadistic butchers. Before Imperial reinforcements could arrive, a huge force of Chaos warships were picked up on long-range augers, and the surviving Imperial vessels were forced to withdraw, limping to the safety of the nearby port of Arendt. The storm breaks. As part of the constant vigil around the Eye of Terror, highly trained units of Kasserkin were pushed into the swirling maelstrom, desperate to find some indication of where the first blow would land. Astropathic divinations pointed towards the blighted world of Earthwart, where a massive force was believed to be gathering. Earthwart was a world taken by chaos, its population enslaved and sacrificed to the dark gods. The Kasserkin found nothing alive on Earthwart, merely death and hideous plague zombies infected with the curse of unbelief. But as the Kasserkin prepared to withdraw, frantic Vox communication from their ships in orbit reported numerous vessels advancing on Earthwart from the Eye of Terror. The Kasserkin fell back to their dropships and attempted to return to their carriers, but it was already too late. The Imperial ships were either crippled or had been forced to disengage and make for Cadia. There was to be no escape, and the Cadians were stranded on Earthwart as a massive vessel, larger than the most gargantuan capital ship, approached them. The Planet Killer. Oblivious to their fate, the Cadians could do nothing as the incomprehensible power of the Planet Killer was unleashed in a devastating lance of energy that bored through the planet's crust and sundered the very bedrock. The land split and the planet's core exploded, breaking Earthwart into spinning pieces of molten rock. The death of Earthwart echoed in the warp, blowing out the encroaching warp storms, and every telepath within 1,000 light-years felt its death scream. As Earthwart collapsed in on itself, a chaos fleet of hundreds of warships and hulking transports surged from the depths of the Eye of Terror towards Cadia. The diseased Plagueclaw and Terminus Est, along with a massive flotilla of Plague Hulks, emerged in the Subaco Diablo system and began heading deep into the pestilence-racked sector. Alongside the Chaos Fleet, and guarded by the Despoiler-class battleships Merciless Death and Fortress of Agony, came 2 hideously altered Blackstone fortresses. Where once they had served the Imperium as naval bases, now they resembled twisted and mutated cathedrals, dedicated only to blood and death. Naval patrols, forewarned by surviving astropaths on Belisar, fell back before the tide of corrupted vessels, desperately calling for aid from neighboring sectors. The ban on transit between sectors was still in force, and precious hours were wasted as naval captains fought to overcome the bureaucracy of the Officio Medicae, who attempted to prevent them from press-ganging their crews back into service. Those ships that could be mustered gathered in the Ormantep system under the command of Admiral Pulaski, ready to fight and die to give the defenders on Cadia whatever time they could buy with their lives. Unlike many other naval battles, there was no jockeying for advantageous position by the foes. The Chaos Fleet obviously intended to batter its way through the Imperial Navy, and the 2 fleets clashed in the shadow of the Ethereum Belt, a mineral-rich asteroid field plundered by the mining hulks of Ormantep. Battle was joined, and the horrendously outnumbered Loyalist fleet fought in the grand tradition of the Imperial Navy, with courage, honor, and steadfastness. A dozen vessels were crippled in the opening moments of the battle, either by wave after wave of torpedoes or constant attack runs of Doomfire bombers. But the rest of the fleet fought on. As both fleets intermingled and the battle became a desperate close-quarters engagement, with horrific damage being inflicted on both sides, a portion of the Chaos Fleet split from the main battle and surged past the heavily engaged Navy towards the Agrippina sector. For long hours, the two fleets pounded one another, and all hope seemed lost when Admiral Pulaski's flagship, Honor and Duty, was destroyed in a catastrophic plasma drive explosion. The Imperial defenders had commended their souls to the Emperor when several Chaos warships that had assumed blocking positions suddenly exploded as the warships of Battlefleet Agrippina caught the Chaos Fleet off guard. Led by Admiral Quarren, the newly arrived Imperial reinforcements cleared a path for the beleaguered Navy to disengage from the battle and withdraw to Demios Binary. Quarren had saved what remained of the fleet, but in doing so, had left the way clear for the splinter fleet of Chaos vessels to breach the defenses of the Agrippina sector. With little or nothing to prevent the Chaos ships from entering each planet's orbit, the systems of the Agrippina sector were wide open to attack by the diseased followers of the Plague God. Soon the worlds of this and the Bellis Corona subsector became nightmare visions of hell, mud, horror, and war. On Amistel Majoris, cursed plague marines of Nurgle landed and decimated much of the local defense forces before the forces of the Drukian Fenguard were able to effect planetfall and bolster the embattled defenders. Plague took many hundreds of lives, and the once verdant fields of this prosperous world were reduced to desolate, corpse-choked plains with bodies piled 10 deep in every crater. Colonel Pertage orchestrated a masterful defense, devising a cunning series of trench systems to confound the foe and lead them into deadly fire traps. But the colonel never lived to see his defenses in action, as the plague struck him down before the first major engagement of the war. Space Marines from the Howling Griffins chapter fought their way through the Chaos blockade, escorting the ships of the Legio Astorum to man the defenses as the first wave of attackers struck. Only the Space Marines, with their blessed power armor and Titans, could survive the toxic-ridden battlefields of this plague front and the normally lightning-fast warfare practiced by the warriors of the Adeptus Astartes, bogged down into grueling trench fighting. Both sides fed their forces into the meat grinder of battle, neither willing to surrender the world to the other. On Lelithar, the originating world of the Voice, Imperial Guard soldiers of the Duran Dragoons, together with warlord titans of the Legio Ignatum, landed at Gorgosa and laid siege to the captured Imperial Palace, said to be the operational headquarters of the Voice. The resultant siege decimated much of Lelithar's capital city and cost the lives of millions of people as the city's populace rose to fight the soldiers of the Imperial Guard. Supported by the Death Specters chapter, the siege continues to grind mercilessly towards an uncertain conclusion. Plague swept across the face of every world, and as many soldiers fell to disease as to the weapons of the enemy. In space, Admiral Quarren led the battered fleet in a fighting retreat back to Cadia and stationed it in a defensive posture in conjunction with the 3 Ramillies-class starforts in orbit. The Chaos Fleet advanced towards Cadia, stopping only to allow the Blackstone fortresses to scour Demios Binary to a barren rock. Lightning arcs of incandescent energies raised the planet's surface bare, killing millions of Imperial servants and destroying every structure in a matter of hours. Chaos vessels quickly overwhelmed the orbital defenses of Solar Mariatis, the outermost planet of the Cadian system, and hundreds of dropships carrying traitor regiments of Volscani cataphracts descended to the surface, attacking the mining outposts and capturing the valuable ore refineries from the defending units of the Cadian 23rd. Here, the traitor forces established a forward base of operations from which to launch attacks throughout the system. St. Josemain's Hope fell soon after, the inmates of this military prison rising up against their jailers as the first waves of the Violators' renegade Space Marines attacked. Brutal, close-quarters fighting erupted all across the continent-sized prison, and many of the guards kept a bullet for themselves rather than be taken by the frenzied inmates. Welcoming the traitor forces as liberators, the inmates were to be horrifyingly disabused of this notion, as those allowed to live were instead taken as slaves for the Chaos Fleet or conscripted into its armies. Enemy ships spread throughout the Cadian system, several being picked off by shadowy Eldar vessels that vanished as mysteriously as they arrived, but the bulk of the Chaos Fleet advanced directly on Cadia. Admiral Quarren had done what he could, but the overwhelming Chaos Fleet could not be stopped, and after 3 days of hard fighting, the majority of his ships had been either crippled or destroyed. Those vessels that could escape fled to the Forge world of Cantrell in an attempt to refit and rearm in time to make a difference. But there were precious few of them. A single Ramillies star fort fell to the invaders, the remaining 2 managing to overload their reactors and self-destruct before the enemy could consolidate their hold upon them. With the space around Cadia secured, orbital bombardments hammered the planet's surface, and, one by one, the defense batteries were silenced. Hundreds of cargo hulks moved into orbit and disgorged swarms of landing craft that streaked through the planet's upper atmosphere. The invasion of Cadia had begun.